All right, we've got episode number 11, Wings Up Weekly, Tennessee Tech Athletics video podcast. Going back to the traditional format with the one-on-one guests today, really fired up about this one. I think we're going to have a lot of fun. Longtime sports information director. He is also a TT Sports Hall of Famer, and we just learned that he is going to be an Ohio Valley Conference Hall of Famer. He's my good friend. He's Rob Schabert. Rob, welcome. Great to see you. How are you?
I'm fantastic, Dylan. Thanks for having me. Things are good.
All right. Love to hear that. Well, hey, let's not bury the lead in this episode. Let's get right to it. First and foremost, a huge congratulations is in order. The news earlier this month that you would be elected into the OVC Hall of Fame, a 3-member class along with Eastern Illinois track and field director Tom Akers. You also have the longtime legendary Belmont head coach for men's basketball, Rick Byrd, and then, of course, yourself. Congratulations, Rob. That is awesome. Take us through how and when you learned of this honor.
Well, first of all, congratulations to the other 2 inductees. I guess outside of the track circle or outside of Eastern Illinois, most people probably don't know about Tom, but I think everybody knows about Rick Byrd and his success. And of course, Tom, I did know about him and his unbelievable success at EIU. So congratulations to them. I was sitting at home one day a couple of weeks ago, and I guess I was doing what I do every day, watching some Netflix series, and phone rang, and it was Mark Wilson. Along with Mike Lehman, and they said they had some good news for me, and they told me that the OVC had selected me. So, I mean, I was pretty much speechless when they told me. I had heard from Kyle Schwartz a couple of years ago when I went into the Tech Hall of Fame. He kind of said things like, well, now we got to get you in the OVC Hall of Fame. That was basically all I heard about it. I didn't hear anything since then. Didn't really give it any thought. And then all of a sudden there it came with the phone call. So what a thrill. What a thrill.
I mean, that's just so great. Such a great way for you to find out. I'm getting to know you the last several years. I know you're a modest guy, but I also know that you have an appreciation for history, putting things into a historical context. You'll be one of only 89 members in this OVC Hall of Fame, and you'll also be one of just 2 full-time sports information directors, joining Carl Park from Eastern Kentucky when he got inducted back in 2005. I mean, what does something like that mean to you?
Well, first of all, I'm in there with some of the most impressive names in OVC history. If you look down who's in there, it's the presidents of universities, coaches that have been champions through the years. So it's amazing to do that. But to get in with those guys and to get into the OVC Hall of Fame, I guess what it means is for coaches, you can tell what they've done by wins and losses. But for sports information directors, there's no wins and losses. There's no, how do you gauge? And but I knew Carl Park, and there are several other people that I've known in the sports information field around the league throughout the years. It means that the people that nominated me, first of all, the Tech people, and then the people that voted on it, recognized what we did at Tennessee Tech. Even though we didn't have wins and losses, we tried to always be cutting edge on what we did. We never backed down from trying new things. Most of them were very successful. But I guess it means that they recognized what we did and how hard we worked for our student athletes and our staff. And they gave us the nod and said, you know, you did a good job. And so that's what I feel most proud about, is that somebody outside of the Tech circle and somebody outside of Cookeville looked at what we did and approved of it.
Well, of course, this is a conference Hall of Fame. And yes, you spent 34 years at Tennessee Tech as a sports information director, but that also means you spent 34 years working with, traveling to, establishing relationships with other schools in the OVC, as well as also other personnel in the OVC. 3.5 decades. I go back to a video when this announcement was made of you, and one of the things you said in it was, I cherished the notion that while we were on different sidelines and different benches, we never let the rivalries stand in the way of our true friendships among the ranks. It seems like those relationships really had an impact on you.
They did, and it's, I mean, such great people that I got to work with in the sports information field. And I think it's because we all respected each other and how hard we worked, the hours we put in, the efforts we were making for our own schools. Yes, we were on opposite sides, and I always wanted to beat whoever. Murray basketball, I couldn't stand Murray or Murray basketball, but Dave Winder was I would trust him, in any situation. And some of the other people that I worked with, you mentioned Carl Park. He's, by the way, the first person I ever met in the OVC when I took the job at Tennessee Tech. And Joe LaFaro and Brad Kirtley and Lee Wilmot and some of the longtime people, we worked together side by side, telling the same story of the same event, even though we had different versions of it. Mine might have been a winning story and his might have been a losing story, but we're telling the same story. You know what that's like. And when it was all over, we could put aside our differences on the court or the field or whatever, and we could go out and have a drink. We could sit and reminisce. We could commiserate about things that aren't going well, or we could congratulate each other on things that are going well. So yeah, we made really good friendships. And we don't get very often the opportunity to go visit those people now that I'm not traveling to those schools. But whenever I'm traveling to Minnesota, a lot of times we try to stop up at Eastern Illinois at Charleston and go see Rich Moser, or Dave Kidwell, who's retired there, or Brad Kirtley up at Clarksville. We don't see him very often, Ron Hines over at Southeast Missouri, but when we do, instantly we're reconnected because of what we've all gone through in this field.
Well, this is not your first rodeo when it comes to the Hall of Fame. In fact, not that long ago, November 2018, inducted into the T2 Sports Hall of Fame. I got to imagine that was such a special night for you, your family. What was interesting about that is you were the MC, just like you've been the MC for the T2 Sports Hall of Fame induction each of the last 36 years. It's not every day that you get to MC your own Hall of Fame induction. What sticks out to you most about that night? And then just in general, getting into the T2 Sports Hall of Fame.
Well, that was always one of my all-time favorite things to do, the Hall of Fame dinner. And all the student athletes that were available, and that was almost every one of them, came every year, and I got to address those people, all those student athletes and coaching staffs. And then all their friends and family of the inductees. I got to see the inductees. I pretty much knew every one of them through my career. And it was thrilling to see them. It was exciting to see all the students, all the inductees, but obviously the most important thing that night, the most memorable thing that night was once I got up to be inducted and I got to look out in the audience to see who was there in recognition of my induction. It was my family. My entire family came from Minnesota. They drove in from all over the country. Matt came down with Jacob down from Moorhead. My daughter came from Johnson City with her husband. And there was all of my family. And not only my family was all there, a lot of my closest friends from the Cookeville area. Some came down from Minnesota. And so many of the people that I really love in this world were all there for that night. And that's what made it really special.
That's fantastic. And your position titles at Tennessee Tech for the 34-year Sports Information Director, Assistant Athletic Director for Sports Information and Broadcasting, a wealth of responsibilities that we'll get into as the episode progresses. Basically, though, it boils down to storytelling. And in the several years I've gotten to know you, nobody tells a tale like Rob Schabert. So let's hear some stories. First, how did you get to Cookeville at the very beginning of this from Minnesota?
Well, unfortunately, the first job I ever took was at Mankato State University, and didn't realize it at the time, but I was the first full-time SID there. And when they set up the position, they made a mistake, and nobody knew about it. Nobody realized about it until we were well into my career there. I had 2 or 3 or 4 years behind me. They called me in one day, and towards the end of my 5th year, and they said, "We messed up. The position you're in was set up as a faculty position. And if we sign you to another contract, you would have to be tenured." And they said, "We can't have a tenured sports information director." And the only way out of it was to eliminate the position entirely. And then they waited a year, and then they started it up into a different area and this and that. But in the meantime, they said, "So your job is eliminated. You're going to be gone in a couple months. We're going to give you a graduate assistant. You need to teach him everything there is to know, and then he's going to carry on for a year." I'll never forget that. His name was Doug Hart. And I didn't take it out on Doug Hart. I couldn't. It wasn't his fault. He got the position, and I did train him the best I could for a while. But he lasted about 3 months, and he went into the boss's office, and he says, "There's no way I can do this job part-time as a grad assistant without more experience." And he quit. And so they were jumping around finding SIDs. Took them a few years. Then they finally found a guy up there, a guy named Paul Allen, who's been there for about 30 years, does a great job. But there I was without a job. I had a little boy, and Matt was like 2 years old. And so I was applying for and looking for jobs around the country. And I got several telephone interviews, and they went well, but I didn't get any positions, any jobs. And I always said, you know, if I could get on scene, on site, and do a face-to-face interview, I think I can do better. Well, I got two in 2 days. I got one at Tennessee Tech and one at Drexel University. And so I flew down to Cookeville, down to Nashville. I came to Cookeville, I interviewed. When I left here, they hadn't offered me the job. So I flew straight to Philadelphia and I interviewed at Drexel. And on the spot, after the interview, they offered it to me and I accepted it because I needed a job. I had a young family. So I flew home to Minnesota and we told everybody we're moving to Philadelphia. That was on a Thursday. Friday morning, they called me from Tech and offered me the job here. Well, that was a decision that my wife, Joan, and I had to make. And we thought about it. Do we want to live in big city, Philadelphia, and work right downtown in an urban setting? Or do we want to live in a smaller town like Cookeville, and a much more rural setting, which Cookeville in 1982 was much smaller than it is today. And so we made the decision to come to Tech. And so here I am. And we came down here thinking, Dylan, we thought we'd come for a year, maybe two at the most, and get back to the Midwest, get back to our family in Minnesota. And so now we're almost 40 years here. So that didn't work the way we figured.
I mean, it seems like it was an amazing decision. I don't think very many people, at least maybe, I'm just thinking this, know how close you were to ending up in Philadelphia.
Yeah, and I honestly don't like cities. So I think if we had gone to Drexel, it would have been a 1 or 2 year deal, and we would have been back in Minnesota. And that is a small regret in my life. My whole family was up there, and we were down here 1,000 miles away, and we'd get to see them 2 or 3 times a year. They'd come down, we'd go up there when we could. But our parents aged and eventually passed away, and we weren't there. We weren't there for them. So that was a little bit of a regret to be here. But we did have a fantastic life. We raised our family here, and Cookeville has just been a remarkable place to be. I wish I could say I would never change things. And for the most part, I wouldn't. I would have liked to have been back in Minnesota with family, obviously. But for the most part, this has been a great place to be, a great school to work at. And I've had great people to work with. So it's been pretty good.
So you end up, of course, 1982 at Tennessee Tech. You're the sports information director there. What was the job description like? I mean, we're talking, there's no social media, the video elements that we're accustomed to today, that's not there. I mean, there's no internet. So what were the major focuses for the sports information director?
Well, the biggest thing was we wrote press releases. We ran them off on a mimeograph machine. You younger people don't even know what a mimeograph machine is. We would hand crank this thing and turn out the copies of the press release. We would hand address the stickers on the labels of the envelopes, and we would mail out 100 to 150 press releases every week about the upcoming events or what happened. So it was a very slow process. Our job was then still to tell the story of the student athletes and the stories of our teams and our coaches and so on. But it was a much different world in how we told the story. We also got more publicity or more coverage in newspapers because there were no professional sports franchises in Nashville. And so we got better coverage in the newspapers. We got better coverage in televisions. And those things over the years dwindled as social media came about, as the internet came about. Pretty soon our job description changed entirely. We became our own media. We had the local newspaper. We had a few things once in a while in the Nashville or other newspapers. And some people didn't understand. How come we don't have the same coverage in Nashville papers? And they just didn't understand. Those papers were covering Vanderbilt and Tennessee, and then the pro teams a lot more. And places like Tech and Austin P, if we weren't, in the city like Tennessee State, they still got coverage, but we didn't get much coverage. So we had to find other ways to get the word out. The only things that are still the same are we still write the way we did back then. Writing hasn't changed. You still have to tell the story. And Thomas Cohern and yourself, Dylan, and you guys do a marvelous job of telling the story, writing the story. But there's not as big as an emphasis today as there was on the long form writing and press releases. In fact, press releases we've changed. They're now game notes. We just put it out in bullet format. But there's still writing involved. There's still photography involved. And there's still design and creativity and makeup, things like that. So those things are involved. It's just the delivery system is almost 100% changed.
And you brought it up, getting into the digital age as the industry evolved. I mean, you talk about ttsports.com. Eventually you spearheaded streaming games, the Golden Eagle Sports Network and the OVC Digital Network. Now they're on ESPN Plus. I'm sure there were stat programs that came out and everything. What made your job into the digital age? What were some of the challenges, and then what made it easier for you as we transitioned into that?
Well, we had the same challenges that everybody in any industry probably has, keeping up with the changes in the technology. And I mean, how fast did things change over the years? We would barely get into something. I remember we learned a brand new statistics stat program on the computer for volleyball, and then that one wasn't the one we used anymore. Stat Crew came along and it took over, and we all had to learn Stat Crew, which is, we do it now second nature. We don't even think about it. It's automatic. But learning each of those new things as they came along, we had to learn it like everybody in every industry had to do. The thing that made it easier was the people that were working with me. And I'll throw out one name that was magnificent at it, and that was Brandon Goodwin. He came to us as a student, was assigned to us, wasn't in that field. I don't know if he was in mathematics or what he was in, but he came to us, and after 1 year, he fell in love with sports information, ended up working with us for 6 years, left here and got a job at Florida Atlantic and stayed in sports information for a few years. But he knew technology, and we relied on him very heavily in setting up things like when Dylan, one day the OVC told us at every school on a Monday that by this Thursday, you must have courtside instant replay for all games for the referees. And Mark Wilson was the AD, and he called us to the office and he said, we have to have instant replay by Thursday's game on the court side. And we looked around at each other, and Mark said to me, he said, Rob, make it happen. And I said, okay. And we walked out, and I said to Brandon, how in the heck are we going to make this happen? All we were doing at the time was one camera web streaming. We'd run a camera through a laptop and send it out to the internet, and that's all people watched. There was no audio. We picked up Roger Ely's broadcast of the game on the radio and wired it through the computer, and that was it. It was low tech. We had to figure out a way to get it from upstairs where we did it down to the floor and have it. And so Brandon and Ben Shannon and myself, we put our heads together, and we came up with I don't know how the other schools did it, but within a week, every school in the OVC had instant replay. We did it, and we did it that way for 2 or 3 or 4 years. Then we came up with a much simpler and better way. But everything that came along, we just had to learn it. And thank goodness I learned a lot of it, but I couldn't learn all of it. But I had good people that helped us get it through it.
Well, another role that you had based on that story right there, problem solver, it goes with writer, photographer, statistician, MC, broadcaster. I mean, the list goes on and on. One of the things, though, I want to hit on is designer, because you built kind of a dynasty when it comes to media guide covers, so much so that you were awarded 6 times by USA Volleyball Best in the Nation for your design covers. I got a few of them right here. Look at this one, Tour de OVC. This is the 1992 Volleyball Media Guide. You've got the cities, the towns in the OVC there. Got another one right here, Mount Crushmore, with the 4, I guess, volleyball players up there. And it wasn't just volleyball. Here's like a softball one right here. Big game hunter. They're in safaris. They've got their bats. You got zebras here, Mr. Lion up top. Like, these are amazing, Rob. How'd you get this creativity to do this?
I was just LSD, Dylan. Simply, we were all on LSD at the time. I kid. I hope nobody takes that seriously. We just opened ourselves up to any possibility. And there were a few coaches that had some crazy ideas. I had crazy ideas, and we all just worked together. Jenny Gilbert, the volleyball coach, you saw a couple of the volleyball covers. She was always willing to do something weird and whatever. Tori Atchison, as much as anybody, our softball coach, he had some ideas. or if I had the idea and we took it to those coaches, they were always willing to do those things, and they just turned us loose and let them do them. Now, there was probably 3 people that I have to point to that were absolutely instrumental in doing them, in making them a reality. I may have had the ideas, or the coaches and myself, but Ed Vail was the designer for all those years, and it was before Photoshop, before InDesign, anything like that. He was doing it cut and paste, and I mean, he was doing it manually, doing those covers and coming up with layers and things like that. And then the 2 photographers at the time at Tech were Dean Carruthers. The late Dean Carruthers was great, and John Lucas. Both of those guys were, I think, they may have been bored by all the photography they did for the campus. They did a lot of what we called grip and grins, where they'd get called to the business department and take a picture of a couple professors and a donor standing there holding the check. And they told me, they said, boy, those are boring pictures, but we got to shoot them. They loved when I'd call them and say, we've got a new cover. They'd go anywhere. We went way out into the mountains one time to take one of the volleyball covers, and we spent like 14 hours there. John climbed a mountain, and I mean, it was crazy what we were doing. But those 2 guys loved doing it, and they accepted whatever challenge we had. We found a way to shoot it, and then Dean found a way, or Ed Vail found a way to put it together. And I was over at his office more than I was at my office. And, you know, we just had fun doing it. And then some of the coaches, like I mentioned, a couple, Jim Ragland, the former football coach, one of our favorite covers of all time, featured Jim Ragland on the cover, and that won Best in the Nation in all of college football. There it is. Yep. We had 2 football players, an offensive and defensive player. One was named Shane Queen, and one was named Willie Queen. And I give Jeff Patton credit for the slogan. He said, why don't we use pair of queens to open and do something about poker? And so from there, we took it from there, and we talked Jim Ragland into doing it, and he was very, very happy to do it. We went out to a horse ranch in town, and we shot it in the barn. We went out and we found a wash tub, and we got the poker chips, and we did whatever we needed to do and shot that. And here's the secret of that one, Bill, in the bottom corner,
right
the
there,
very bottom corner, right there.
Yep.
There's a hand, and it's a losing hand. You can see there's no chips in front of that hand. Jim Ragland has all the chips. That hand is it's the zip code for Murfreesboro, for Middle Tennessee State. We wanted to say subtly, nobody knew it, that Middle Tennessee was a big loser, and we were going to beat them. And so that was one of the things we snuck in there. We didn't have a lot of secrets we snuck in there, but that was one of them.
That's fantastic. I love hearing that. The rivalry is alive and well. That's great. Tennessee Tech and Middle Tennessee. I mean, Rob, clearly creativity was always at the forefront of everything that you did at Tennessee Tech. And I think a lot of people who went to Tech basketball games over the years would know that based on one of your roles where you would be the promotional in-game host. And you came up with some out of the box, let's say, promotional ideas, some of the games and things like that. Are there any that really stick out to you that were just so outrageous, so out of the box?
Well, I'll probably forget some of the best ones. The ones that I liked to do the most is when I mixed things up and had something that was completely unexpected. For instance, I came up with one. I had a couple of hockey sticks that I had brought with me from Minnesota, and I got some tennis balls, and we brought people out on the court at a basketball game, and they had to try and use a hockey stick to shoot a tennis ball up and hit it off the backboard. And it was hockey and tennis at a basketball game. So that was just unexpected. We went out and I got Walmart to donate a couple of really tiny kids' bikes. And then we went and found very large contestants, and they had to try and ride these little tiny bikes down the court and back. Roger Ely's a pretty big man, and we had him out there during one time out. I mean, the bike, you can almost not see the bike under Roger, and there he is trying to pedal down the floor and back. So things that people didn't expect. We had a chipping contest. We went with golf, where we got a little green pad. We got it from Bobby Nichols, and we had somebody down at the other end holding a big giant 55-gallon plastic trash can, and they would try and chip a plastic golf ball into that. So the most fun ones were things that people wouldn't expect at a basketball game. We did a lot of other things, dribbling down the floor, double dribbles and baskets and things like that. Those were never as much fun to watch as people out of their element doing crazy, funny things. And some of the things that we came up with, I mean, I had a long list of other promotions that we never even got around to doing. One of them was the celebrity fruit vendor that I wanted to do. But that's another story I'll tell another time.
Do we have video somehow of Roger on this bike? Can we get that to happen?
I don't know. We might, but you know what? It didn't happen during timeout or during a commercial or during halftime, which most of the time, if we were web streaming it on the web stream, or if it was back when WCTE was doing all the games, they probably weren't broadcasting. So we probably don't have footage, but I know that photographs, still photos exist of Roger sitting on that bike.
We are going to find that, and we are going to show people, because that is phenomenal. Your roles that you discuss, I mean, that's another one, in-game host and coming up with these marketing ideas. You had so many of them that we've documented. I'm sure you have some great stories about when you were broadcaster doing some games on the radio or TV. I'm sure you have some great stories about all the public speaking that you did within the department. What, though, of all the roles you had, which did you enjoy doing most?
I love doing radio on TV and hosting the coaches shows. Way back, I used to host Frank Harrell, and he pretty much didn't have any kind of structure. He just let me go. I remember one time I opened the show with Frank talking about Vidalia onions, because he came from that part of Georgia where they're from, and he didn't expect it, and he didn't know, but he was a good sport. So those were fun. I loved it when I had a really, really good story to tell about a student athlete, and we got a chance to tell the story, to be creative in our storytelling and writing it. We talked about the media guide covers. I loved it when our most creative things came out and people would see the covers or the posters. But Dylan, I think my favorite part of the job was the actual live activities, when I got to be the MC at either the Hall of Fame dinner or most recently the Golden Wings Awards, when I got to talk face to face with people. And when I got to be the MC on the court, when I got to see the reaction right then and there from the fans. So being a live MC and doing those things, those were probably my favorite part of my job. And those really weren't in my job description. We just did them.
Well, natural at it. And I mean, so good for so many years doing the Hall of Fame, the Golden Wings, the encore promotions, all of those things. I wondered if we might hear for one of your roles, driver, because you think about, and I know you've told me in the past how many miles you think you have put on the media vans, and back in the day when it was a packed house and you mentioned Roger Ely, the broadcaster, and so many other people to all these games within the conference, out of the conference. You think about all the plane flight trips you have, so many of those tech football games to FBS opponents. Is there a trip, not necessarily a game, but a trip as a whole that stands out to you during your 34 years?
Well, there were flying trips, as you mentioned. There were driving trips. Some of the ones that we flew to that really jump out, we flew to Austin, Texas, with softball for the Austin Regional, and that was just a memorable trip. I don't know why, but it just jumps into my head. All those football games we flew to, those FBS games, Oregon and Auburn. We didn't fly to Auburn, but some of the other ones. But I think Wisconsin, going to Wisconsin and seeing the Wisconsin fans and how absolutely insane they were, and Iowa. I loved the Iowa and Wisconsin fans. It was really hard to be at those places because we were beyond the heavy underdog. You know that. We'd go in there and everybody was having a great time because they knew they were going to probably whip Tennessee Tech, but it was still fun to be there. Driving trips, we took some long trips. One that jumps into my mind is we drove up to play football at Bowling Green, and we drove up there and checked into our hotel and kept going, our entire media van, up to Detroit. It was the last year of Old Tiger Stadium in Detroit, and so we went up there and went to a Tigers baseball game. And there was a lot of all-night drives where we would literally drive 7 hours up to Eastern Illinois, cover a football game that took us maybe 5 or 6 hours from start to finish, and then drive all the way back and get home at 5, 6, 7 o'clock in the morning. And pretty much I did all the driving. Most of the people on the trip weren't eligible to drive because it was a state vehicle. And so some of those just I think the long hours and getting home and getting about an hour or two of sleep and getting right back to work, those were the ones that stand out.
Well, having been on some of those trips with you, I know that you made them go a lot quicker with your love of sports trivia. I know that we would constantly be talking about sports trivia and everything like that. How many miles do you think you drove when you just those trips alone?
Just driving the media car, the media van, it was probably, I mean, there's no way of knowing, but I took the number every year and the miles, and it was probably close to 1,000,000 miles of driving, Dylan, just to get to and from all those games, because it didn't matter where the game was. Early on, we never flew anywhere. We drove to the University of Missouri. We drove down to Texas. We drove anywhere. So yeah, it added up.
Wow, that's great. That's great. You talk about driving all these places. So you're driving these places is because to cover games. 34 years, all the different sports at Tennessee Tech, all the games, all the competitions. We're talking about thousands and thousands. Are there any games alone that stick out to you most throughout your tenure?
Kyle Schwartz asked me a similar question on a podcast that I did with him, and it was so hard to come up with one because there's too many. There's too many. One that stands out was the win at Middle Tennessee back in, I think, '83, when we were 1-9 and they were 9-1, and we went down there and beat them. I'll never forget that game. But the other ones, there's just too many. And some of the most memorable ones were actually losses. We went in and we lost a game. Either we were favored and we lost, or we were heavy underdogs and we almost won. So it's not always just wins that were memorable. But my answer to Kyle and my answer to you as well, Dylan, is the most memorable things that I did activity-wise as far as events were not a game. Were not a basketball or football, baseball game. They were two sports. They were track and field, outdoor track and field, and they were the men's or women's golf tournaments. And I rarely had the chance to do this, but when I did, I would drive to those events to be a photographer. And so I'd spend the entire day at a track meet wandering around shooting hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of photos of all of our women on the track team in all the different events. Or I would drive around the golf course. And of course, I went when it was a beautiful day, driving around at a track meet or at a golf course, driving around a golf course, these beautiful golf courses, taking photos, trying to find just as many different angles and shooting everybody as often as many shots as I could. Then we used those pictures of those same athletes for 4 years while they were at Tech, because those were some of the only photos we ever got of those kids. So we'd get somebody like Stephanie Place running a track meet as a freshman. And we were still using pictures of her in her senior year that I had shot that first year. So those events, track meets and golf tournaments, were my favorite memories of all time.
Well, we're nearing kind of the end here on Wings Up Weekly this episode in honor of baseball coming back that we just found out. It's called the 7th inning stretch right now. So a couple more questions for you, Rob. You hear a lot in the coaching world about a coaching tree. Let's say Nick Saban, for example, and all of his offensive and defensive coordinators, they become head coaches at other SEC schools or other schools across the country, and that's like the Nick Saban coaching tree. You, over the years, have built up a pretty legitimate sports information tree. I won't be able to name all the names, and I apologize for some that I leave out, but you think Jocelyn Vervelde is working at Texas. Holly Weber is at Missouri. Jenna Wilhoit is at Dayton. I mean, Mike Lehman is now the Tennessee Tech Sports Information Director. You hired him. Aaron Bean, Associate AD over at St. Leo. I mean, just think of that list. What does something like that mean to you, to have these people that you hired, that you helped mentor, now having this kind of success across the country?
You forgot Dylan Visano, also successful, that I hired. It's great, Dylan, to look around and see that they had so much success or are having so much success. I'm very proud of that. I didn't really oversee them very much. I brought them in and I said, here's your responsibilities. Now let's do it. And I let them learn on their own, so that they did learn fast, and they've gone off. A lot of the people that work for me got out of the business. They just didn't want to do the hours because it's a lot. But many of them are very successful in other fields. And I think it's partly because of how hard they worked here at Tennessee Tech and how disciplined they had to be to work in our field for that year or 2 years that they were here. So I've got former interns that are, they run a restaurant, or they're very successful. Buddy Pearson was an assistant of mine. Scott Wilson came in. He was an assistant. He's now the sports editor at Herald Citizen. There's been a lot of people that we've hired and brought in, and I'm proud of every one of them. They've gone on to great careers. And you're right, we can't mention all of them, but there's a lot of them out there.
Well, one of the ones that we didn't mention, but we're gonna talk about here, because anyone who went to Tennessee Tech sporting events back in the day, especially those that worked, would always see your children, Kristen and Matt, run around helping out dad in whatever way possible to help you do your job. Matt ends up in, let's say, the family business. He's at another OVC school, Morehead State, for 15 years, director of media relations there. I always thought that was just so cool that your son was at another OVC school, and any time that, whether it was in Morehead, whether it was in Cookeville, and those two teams got together, or if it was in an OVC tournament setting, what have you, that you got to see your son in that kind of a setting. That's just seemed really cool.
It was, and the competitiveness between the two of us. I wanted Tech to win. He wanted Morehead to win, of course. And his allegiance is definitely with Morehead State now. And obviously I can't blame him, as it should be. But it got to the point where I really started to appreciate him and his job and Morehead State, what they were doing. I got to know a lot of the Morehead State coaches. So it got to the point where if Tech wasn't going to be the champion, or Tech wasn't going to win something, I wanted Morehead State to win it. So when Tech and Morehead were playing a lot of times in baseball championships, that was a hard one for us, because he was pulling and I was pulling, and he won a few, I won a few, but it was really thrilling to be able to work in the same field as him. And I'm so proud of what he's done up there. And I'm very proud of my daughter, what she's done. So Kristen. And so, yeah, it's been very fun to see that happen.
Well, that's great stuff. Rob, this has been an absolute pleasure. And you mentioned, you hired me back, I guess 7 years ago. And I can't thank you enough. That has been an amazing time here at Tennessee Tech. Before we let you go, some people go into retirement, they kind of take it easy and stuff. That doesn't really seem to be the case for you. You're out here producing books. Look at this. Justifying Grace just came out. Published author Rob Schabert. Tell us about your book. Tell us about what you've been up to.
Well, that book took me 33 years to write, Dylan. Because I was a sports information director, I didn't have time to write. And literally, I started it in '87 and finally published it this year. Because I would work on it a little bit here and a little bit there, and it sat for months and months and months. But it was a thrill to finally complete it and get it published. My second one, it took me a lot less time. It took me 4 years to write. I've got it being edited right now. It should be published in a couple of weeks. Hopefully, it's called The Purpose of Me and You. And it's another novel, another piece of fiction. That's what I want to write, is I want to write fiction. I was writing nonfiction for all those years in sports information, and now I get to just make it all up. It's 100% made up stories, and it's really a lot of fun. It's way more work than I thought. And I'll sit down and I'll write every day for some period of time, and it's a lot of work. So yeah, I hope I'm not going to be a bestseller because I'm self-published. But I'm in the top 300,000 authors right now in America. So
great stuff.
It's not going fast, but it's out there. So it's fun. I'm as proud of these books as I was of the things I did in my career as well.
Well, congratulations, because that's no small feat, writing and publishing a book. So congratulations on that. Congratulations on the election to the OVC Hall of Fame. That's spectacular. Great job. And thanks for joining us, Rob. This was awesome.
Thank you very much, Dylan.
There you go. That's Tennessee Tech longtime sports information director Rob Schabert. It's going to do it for another episode here of Wings Up Weekly.